The Toronto Blue Jays stars, Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr., a lot has been said about them. Who's going to stay? Who's going to be dealt at the deadline? Will they be dealt at the deadline? There's a lot of conversation surrounding those two, and more reports are coming out that are making the future of those two cornerstones more clear. So we'll break that down and much more on this episode of Jays Digest. What's up, Jays fans? I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. Nice win today for the Toronto Blue Jays. They're now 9 games under 500, but it was great to see George Springer hit well at the top of that lineup. He's really started to turn the corner, and I'm glad. I'm glad that he's turning his season around after a really bad start and a lot of talk about sending him down, outright releasing him. I think we could put those discussions to bed, and I'm going to be the first one to go out there and just say I owe George Springer an apology because he's been really good as of late, and he's been one of the bright spots in what has been a terrible season for the Toronto Blue Jays. Another bright spot has been Vladimir Guerrero Jr. See the poster behind Nick over there, and he's been a pretty big shining light on this team, Nick. He's really turned things around. Maybe the power isn't as much as we'd like to see from him, but you could see that he's really hitting the ball hard and the average is there, the OPS is there. So there have been a few good components on this team this season, but Bo Bichette has not been one of them. And him and Vladdy have been brought up numerous times in trade talks, not by the front office, but by fans. And they're wondering who's going to be here for the long haul. Are Bo and Vladdy going to be the dynamic duo that are going to lead the Blue Jays in the next half decade or the next decade? I don't think so. I'll just give you my 2 cents right there. I think Bo is going to be the first one to go, and Nick, some reports are really leaning in that direction as well.
Yeah, we have some major updates. Now the deadline is only 9 days away. Now, I don't think Bo's going to get traded at the deadline, but we have some insight on his future. Before we get to it, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button. It would mean the world if you could do that for us. About 73% of you aren't subscribed. But Peter, let's get right into it here. And this was dropped from Bob Nightingale earlier today, and there's some other things as well. Keegan Matheson had some things to say, but this is what the latest news and update is for Bo Bichette ahead of this trade deadline. So his sources say that the Toronto Blue Jays star shortstop Bo Bichette has told friends that he would welcome a trade out of Toronto, while first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. badly wants to stay in Toronto and is open to signing a long-term extension. So we have two pretty big updates here from Bob Nightingale. Again, you can take it with a grain of salt, but Peter, it seems like, and again, I've kind of been saying this, we've both been saying this now for a while, it seems like Bo's time is ticking down in Toronto. Now, again, I don't think he's going to get traded this offseason or this trade deadline. I don't think that's what's going to happen, especially given the fact that he's injured, even though they did trade Donaldson a few years ago and he was injured. I think that Bo Bichette's time in Toronto might be coming to an end, and it seems like multiple reports now have said that Bo is open to leaving the Blue Jays.
Yeah, well, it doesn't shock me, and you could tell by his body language that he's pretty much has 1 foot out of the door already. And if someone is going to behave themselves that way, and if someone is going to play as poorly as Bichette has, and then expect the organization to accommodate him, I mean, I think he's a little bit delusional in that aspect. And Bo hasn't been good. He's been a big reason as to why the Blue Jays have struggled as much as they have this year. You see those numbers right there, Nick. 597 OPS. I know he's dealt with the calf injuries and he's been in and out of the lineup, but the one word I would use to describe Bo is just dejected. He looks dejected. He looks frustrated, and for good reason. Obviously, he expects a lot of himself, but you could tell that his mind's not really in it for whatever reason this season with the Blue Jays. And yes, he is a big reason as to why they're 9 games under 500 and why they're going to be sellers at the deadline. When you're an elite hitter and have been pegged as this monster contact hitter, a guy who can hit 300 in his sleep, and you go out and produce what he's producing this year, yeah, it's not very good. His career number is still solid, and he's still been one of the more consistent performers over the course of his big league career. But when you look at those numbers for this season, it's just not going to cut it. He was someone expected to be an all-star, far from it this season. And I don't know if the Blue Jays would be wise to give him all that money, considering his body language and the lack of leadership that he's displayed this season.
Yeah, and he's obviously under control for one more year. And this would not be the time to trade him. His value is at its lowest. And yeah, it's very interesting that Bo has told friends reportedly to welcome a trade. And he said that earlier that if he gets traded, he would not be surprised. And Keegan Matheson had some insight here, Blue Jays writer and insider. He said, sitting here today, my expectation is that Vladdy enters free agency, but the Jays try to sign him back. And the second part is pretty important here. Sitting here today, he considers Guerrero far likelier than Bichette to be with this organization beyond next season. Again, both of these guys are under control. After this year, they have one more year, and then after into the 2025 season is when they dip out. But Peter, this is an interesting thing. Now, if you rewind back to before the season started or at some point earlier on this year, Bo Bichettes said, you can read it here. Like I said, there's nothing I would like more than to win a championship with Vladdy in this organization. I don't think anybody would be disappointed or be more disappointed if I couldn't get one and I was moved because I didn't produce. But at the same time, nothing would surprise me. Now, this was earlier on in the year. This wasn't before the season. This was earlier on in the year. And Peter, basically, he wants to win. Like he said, I love nothing more than to win with Vladdy. We've talked about winning since he was 18. But that was a bit before the season took a complete downfall, and now it's even at the lowest point, rock bottom we've used before. But again, like at this point, I don't think they're going to move him, but I don't see him as a cornerstone for the future if he continues to perform this way. But I don't even know if he wants to stay in Toronto, and I could see a world, maybe it's a hot take, where he asks out of Toronto. Right now, it's just that he'd be fine with a trade, would welcome one. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point here he asks out, especially given the fact that he's probably not going to play for the Jays for the rest of the year, at least for the next few weeks.
Yeah, well, I mean, he hasn't done it publicly, but I think just his body language and the way that he's performing in that lineup is pretty telling to me that he wants out and he wants nothing to do with his organization. And if I'm the front office, I look at that and say, okay, well, let's try and get whatever we can for this guy and try to build for the future with players that do want to be a part of the solution. Bo has clearly not willing to do that. And I mean, whatever, good riddance, in my opinion, because he's had his time. He's looked good here at times, but over the past two seasons, I think it's just been inconsistency with him. And I know his numbers on the surface look pretty good last year, but if you take away his month of September, they're not very good. Like pop up the stats, Nick. Let's look at his stats from last year. An 814 OPS, 306 batting average. Those are really good numbers, but that's because he hit almost 500 in the month of September and he willed the Blue Jays to the playoffs. But before that, I mean, he was a big reason why they were not in the playoff picture and why they may have been struggling and
Yep.
teetering around that 500 mark. So I understand that he has been consistent over the course of his career, but in the past two seasons, I haven't really liked what I've seen out of Bo Bichette apart from 1 month in September of last season. So, um, I don't know. I think the Blue Jays are better suited to move on and try to get prospects for him. I don't agree with you in the fact that his value is at the lowest point right now. I think his value comes from how much control you have of him. And if you have Bo for a year and a half, there's no doubt that he is going to turn it around. He's not going to be a 597 OPS guy for the rest of his career. He's 26 years old and he's ultra talented, so he's going to figure it out. But I think his time here is wearing thin, and the Blue Jays will be better off if they sell to a contender and get a year and a half of Bo Bichette because that'll cost a boatload of prospects. If you trade him at next year's deadline and you only get him for half a season, then you're cutting his value in half if you're the Blue Jays front office. So I think right now would be the best time to do it. And I don't think they're going to be good enough next year to compete. It wouldn't make sense for them to go out and try to run it back with the same roster and some minor additions. That would just be the definition of insanity. It wouldn't shock me again because they've done that for years on end. But I think they're better off just trading him this year, and he's clearly not happy with his situation.
Yeah, the control point is good. I guess he is having his worst season, but that being said, I think most teams trading for him would acknowledge the fact that, I mean, he's led the league in hits twice, and he's a very, very good player. But yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see. We've seen reports say that the Jays are going to try to compete next year in 2025. And if that's the case, I assume they're going to hold on to both of them, maybe move at next year's deadline, depending even what happens with Ross Atkins is still up in the air. And again, Vladdy here, he's having a big bounce back year, his second or his best season since 2021 so far. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on this. Let us know in the comments. What do you want the Jays to do with Bo? Do you think they're best off trading him now? Do you think they're better off waiting until next year? What do you think? Let us know in the comment section down below. And that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching. See you soon.